introduce yourself on the chat as well. It'll be nice for Philip also to get to know you, who the participants are. Okay. Please type in the everyone channel so everybody can actually know what you're, know you, get to know you guys. All right, on to today's talk. Philip runs a creative agency called 48 Degrees and has worked with Accenture and DDB Mudra before. But more importantly to me is that he's a very talented writer. And he has, we've worked with him before, and he's even turned topics like user experience design into something exciting. So I think that really takes some crazy talent to be able to do so. But what he's talking about today is actually a very interesting topic. It's been a recurring theme for us as well, the idea of storytelling. But I think it's rightly so because it's extremely important. The narratives that people craft about their own their brands and companies and so on it's very important as a craft to be able to do this. I think, especially in India, I think a lot of times I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs. I've worked with a lot of startups, so I've seen them refrain from getting deeper and talking, exposing their personalities online and everything else, for the fear of losing or looking unprofessional. I think we are losing out a lot because of it, and I think. Among the other things that Philip is going to talk to us about today, I would ask him to touch upon this topic as well, in the end. So it's my pleasure to welcome Philip, and over to you. You can start with the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sharan. I hope you can hear me. Yeah. It's all a pack of lies, what he's just told you. So I'm just out on a limb here. Anyway, thanks so much for the introduction, Sharan, and thanks so much, Sharan and Preeti, for this chance to have an interesting conversation about one of my favorite subjects, stories, and how it relates to branding. I'm just going to, before we proceed, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. Yeah. Share. Yeah. Can you see the screen?
Yep, it's coming through.
Okay, cool. Full screen, right? Technology is still something we're all getting a little used to. So
just give it a little time, we'll fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that screen visible?
Yep, it's coming through.
Okay. Okay, hi. Nice to see all of you. Thanks so much for joining in. Thanks for making the time on a Friday evening. I know you know, there are several more interesting things you could have done right now, like being at a pub or something. Oh, wait a second. No, you can't. So I guess, well, you don't have much choice. So you may as well listen to what I have to say. Okay, so the topic that Sharan, Preeti, and I decided upon is titled Crafting Brand Narratives. And I was very excited about it. And thanks once again to both of you for giving me the chance to have this conversation, because I think it's very important and it's very subtle. And it's something that gets overlooked in our hurry to create communication. But it's really about the power of stories in branding. And so I'm going to start this session with two stories, two very short stories, fragments of stories rather. The first story is about an Arabian king and his princess. And I think most of us would be aware of that story as part of the Arabian Nights. And the second story is about an Italian explorer whom we all have heard at some point or the other. He's called Marco Polo. He's the one on the right. So going to the Arabian Nights story first. So these are two ancient myths about stories. And the Arabian Nights story goes something like this. So there was this, I mean, some of us are probably familiar. So if you're familiar, bear with me while I sort of take you down memory lane again. But the story goes something like this. So there was a king who used to get married to a new bride every night. And in the morning, he would have her beheaded, or he would have her killed. Don't ask me why. I mean, he was just probably had a mood disorder or something. Now Scheherazade is a woman who gets an opportunity to be the king's bride, and she decides that she's going to stop this cycle. How does she do it? She decides, I'm going to tell him a story every night. So every night she conjures a story for the king. And her stories are so captivating and they have so many cliffhangers that the king must know how the story ends. So he spares her life. He spares her life day after day because she keeps leaving him at a cliffhanger. And he can't kill her because he wants to know how the story ends. So in this way, she breaks the cycle and she saves her life and God knows how many other lives as well, right? That's the Arabian Nights story. The other story is a little less dramatic, but no less interesting. It features Marco Polo on the right. Most of us may not know the myth of Marco Polo and Kublai Khan. We probably heard of the poem Kublai Khan, but we didn't know that in the myths there was a connection between Marco Polo and Kublai Khan. So Kublai Khan has reached a stage in his career where he has conquered almost 70-60% of the earth. And strangely enough, his conquests don't bring him happiness or fulfillment. They just make him feel empty. He just wonders, these lands that I've conquered, I don't know anything about them. And the whole affair seems meaningless. So he commissions Marco Polo to explore these lands and come back to him with stories. What's happening in these places? Tell me. Now, Marco Polo has his own story. Uh, he misses his hometown, Venice. That's his story. So he goes on expeditions and he comes back and starts telling Kublai Khan a whole sort of exploits about places he's been to. He starts describing all sorts of beautiful, fantastical cities. And Kublai Khan doesn't believe everything Marco Polo is saying because it seems a little too fantastical. And after a point, Kublai Khan realizes that Marco Polo is not describing a huge range of cities. He's just describing the same city again and again and again, which is Venice, the city he misses. He's using this storytelling expedition series as an excuse to come up with new variations of Venice, his beloved homeland that he misses. But Kublai Khan doesn't mind because he's reached a sort of end of his, his life as a conqueror. And everything he's done seems meaningless, but the only thing that is giving him some sort of meaning or some sort of anchor is Marco Polo's stories. So those are two crazy little myths that I wanted to start with. Fortunately, you and I, in this day and age, unlike Scheherazade, we don't have to tell stories to save our lives. And unlike Marco Polo, we don't have to tell stories to put some wisdom into the mind of a king. We don't have those kind of challenges. But what I love about these two myths is that whenever we think about the act of storytelling, either for ourselves or for a brand, I like to believe that we come from this tradition. This is the tradition we are coming from. We are modern day descendants of these elaborate, ingenious liars. And yeah, so we may not be as adroit or as ingenious as they are, but we can learn something from Scheherazade. We can learn something from Marco Polo. And what we can learn is, how do we make our writing more interesting? How do we make our brands more captivating so our clients don't behead us the next morning? So yeah, anyway. Right. So that was a little bit of introduction, and I want to now get into the topic. Hold on, I'm having a bit of a glitch. Yeah. So welcome to the session. It's called Crafting Brand Narratives or Learning to Fall in Love with Stories. We're going to be exploring what is the intersection between brands and storytelling or literature? How are these two diverse subjects related? I've always drawn parallels, but here's a chance for us to look at how those parallels actually pan out, right? Um, Writing is my life's work. It's my passion. It's what I enjoy the most. So this is a great opportunity for us to for me to tell you a couple of connections that I have seen between art and branding, and I'd love to hear from you about your thoughts as well. So why is this important, right? I mean, the proverbial why question is, sorry, having a bit of a problem with the, yeah. Okay, so which movie description is more compelling? Let's look at a few examples from art, right? So here's a movie description about this film called About Schmidt. It says, well, About Schmidt is a 2002 American comedy drama written and directed by Alexander Payne and starring Jack Nicholson in the title role. Hoo-ha. The film also stars Kathy Bates and Dermot Mulroney, like I care. It tells the story of Warren, who struggles to find meaning in his life after retirement. Okay, interesting. And the unexpected death of his wife. Okay. His daughter blames him for taking her mother for granted. Okay. When he discovers his wife was having a secret affair with his friend Ray, he angrily goes on a solo journey that ends up renewing his purpose and energy. Okay. So fantastic, very interesting, but I might not want to read this all the way till the end. So here's another way of the same. Can you see the screen? Here's another way of looking at the same idea is, oh, one second. You lose your job, you find out your dead wife is having an affair with your best friend, your daughter is getting married to a loser. How many clues do you need before you know life is begging you to act? So again, we're trying to figure out which kind of writing or which kind of movie description would we be more interested in, right? Which pub seems more fun?
Right.
Okay, so I know yeah, so the one on the left is very interesting and it's very pretty and it's informative. I know what it gives me options, but the one on the right goes straight to my heart, right? Because we've all been in this position and we know how it feels. So we're like, yes, that's the pub that has my heart. Okay, so that's the power of writing. Okay, same book, two different book covers. Okay, this is Atonement, a novel by a very famous English novelist called Ian McEwan. Same book. The one on the left is beautiful, sprawling English countryside that we all love and wish we could be born into in our second life. Um, and then you have this strange variation of the cover on the right, which is an actual cover, which says a dialogue from the book. I love you. I'll wait for you. Come back. That's it. Again, it's an interesting way of looking at a book cover and what stimulates more curiosity. So that's the why. The reason we tend towards stuff like that, the reason our hearts get pulled towards stuff like that is because we love stories. We like stories, we like emotions, we like twists and turns, and we like to see the possibility of the moon coming down from the sky and what's going to happen after that. And brands that sort of tell a story instead of selling a product probably have a higher chance of catching and keeping attention, right? Now you must be thinking, listen, I am not Marco Polo, I am not Scheherazade, I can't tell stories. This is not it's not my cup of tea. I'm not a storyteller. Well, I want to reassure you that you don't have to be an adroit storyteller to do all of that. We can just observe what artists have done and we can draw some lessons, we can borrow some insights, and we can improve what we're trying to do. So which is what we have here, which is really what we're trying to do is trying to look at an intersection between art and branding. And the common area is storytelling, if you think about it. And we're trying to see if we can borrow some values, some techniques from storytelling. And can we embed it into brand communication? Now, there's no magic wand. It's actually quite an analytical, tiresome process, but I'm going to make it look interesting and hopefully inspire you to do something along these lines. Right now, the other question is, yeah, the the question that normally comes to a lot of us is that why do we lose this natural storytelling instinct? I believe we have a natural storytelling instinct. You remember that time when you were young and you were not eating your food and your mom made a story out of all the food on your plate and said, this is, you know, this is planet Mercury or whatever, and this is your favorite dinosaur or whatever. And we used to respond very well to all of that, and we used to recreate all of that with our friends, with our parents, with our crushes and all of that. And then one fine day you stop. For some reason you squash your inner child and you stop being curious and you start getting productive. And once you're on the productivity treadmill, well, the storytelling instinct gets squashed, because storytelling requires imagination. It requires you to pause. It requires you to breathe and make connections. And that takes time. It takes effort. It takes confidence. So, and we don't think that way anymore. We tend to think in an algorithmic way. We get into a problem solving mindset as opposed to an intuitive mindset. I guess our education has prepared us for that sort of thinking in the past, I mean. And work pressures prioritize productivity over creativity. And modern life just does not allow us to pause. So what we're going to do over the course of the next 1.5 hours is we're going to pause, and we're going to increase that space inside us, which has the capacity to create stories or to conjure stories. And we're going to try and tap back into that inner child and see if we can access it more and more. So that's the what, really, a sort of intersection between branding and art. How are we going to do that? I'm going to show you 4 values or techniques of storytelling, and see how they can be adapted in brand communication. You won't find this on the internet. This is just some nonsense that I have cooked up on my own. So if it works for you, great. If it doesn't work for you, we can discuss it over a drink. And we could figure out how best to take this forward, right? So here we go. So this is what I've been reading for a really, really long time. I mean, it's like a disease. I read everything that I find. So I've been reading for like maybe 20, 25 years, all sorts of books. And these are some of the things that I have found in literature, in storytelling, which we can try and relate to branding. The first thing is a concept called snapshots. The second is a concept called conflicts. Yes, those are 2 cats who are about a few seconds away from a cat fight. The third is something called narratives. That is not a frame from a ghost film, but yeah, it is. I know it is a little spooky. Even I found it spooky, but there's a story there. First you see the woman, then you don't see the woman. So anyway, and then the fourth element is language. Yeah, so those are the 4 techniques or values, if you like, that we're going to discuss. What I'm going to do is these are values or techniques from art. What I'm going to try and do, hopefully, is to show you how art uses these techniques, and then show you how a brand can adapt this technique in brand communication, right? And hopefully we'll see the connection. Now the thing is, since we have a problem solving mindset, a processing mindset, we must be instantly thinking, oh, this is step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. It's not. These are just 4 random values. You can use any one. You can use all 4. It's just a value system, if you like, right? So without further ado, let's look at the first one. It's called snapshots. Yeah. So snapshots really is about invite people on a journey and treat them to snapshots, simple, distinctive details. I think the best way to explain this is to just show you an example of art where it actually happens. Okay, so we look at a very famous book that most of you have read and some people love to hate. It's Arundhati Roy. Forget her politics and her the way she polarizes people. This is a famous book. She deserves our consideration, our close attention for the way she wrote this book. Now, I want you to see the first paragraph. What I have here is the very first paragraph of this book. We're going to try and understand what snapshots is, right? So this is how the first paragraph begins. May in Iminum is a place, a fictional place. May in Iminum is a hot, brooding month. It's not just hot, it's hot and brooding. The days are long and humid. Okay, fine. The river shrinks and black crows gorge. They don't eat, they gorge on not just ordinary mangoes, bright mangoes. Not just ordinary trees, in still dust green trees. Okay. Red bananas ripen. Okay. Jackfruits don't just sit on the tree, jackfruits burst. Okay, now what is happening here is wherever you are in whichever part of the world, whether you're in Canada or whether you're in Timbuktu, when you read this paragraph, you are for a few seconds in Iminum. For whatever it's worth, you're there because that's the magic of the writing. And why does that happen? That happens because of the details. That happens because of the snapshots that she has created about the weather and about the crows and about the mangoes and about the fruit. What's really happening is it's really just one or two small details that leap off the page and connect with us emotionally. And they sort of act like snapshots and bring everything to life. You don't need a lot of stuff to captivate someone's attention. You sometimes, at a time, need just one or two really nuanced, authentic, tactile details. And that connects the dots in the reader's mind, and suddenly they're transported to a different place, and then you have them, right? That's really how it works. Now we're going to try and look at how we can adapt or how people have successfully adapted this storytelling value, snapshots, in brand communication. And I'm going to show you an ad that was, forgive me, it's 50 years old. And you're probably thinking, did he really not have anything contemporary to show us? So I did, but I want to show you this ad for a reason because it's an iconic ad. Some of you have probably seen it, and the minute you see it, you'll be like, oh no, not again. But the point is, even though it's old, it has something to teach us about snapshots. This is the ad. I'll wait for the collective groan to pause, and then I'll tell you why I like this ad. Now, this is an ad for Rolls-Royce. It's about 50 years old. So it says, at 60 miles an hour, the loudest noise in this new Rolls-Royce comes from the electric clock. Okay. So what is happening is the minute you see this ad is an iconic ad, this headline is probably, if there was a poll for the top 10 headlines in advertising history, arguably, this one would be there. I'm willing to bet my book collection on it, which is the most valuable thing I have, but that's a different story. So this headline would be very, very important. The reason it's popular, the reason it's so powerful is because it instantly transports you into the car. There are many things happening here. There's movement. You're talking 60 miles an hour. So you're already moving with the ad. And then he says sound, the loudest noise you can hear, there's sound, there's sensory stimulation happening on two levels. You see a visual picture. You can picture yourself sitting in this car, having a superlative driving experience. After reading the ad, you sort of immediately know, okay, this is a very exclusive, self-contained, classy driving experience. And that's exactly what the ad wanted to convey. And believe it or not, this campaign increased Rolls-Royce's sales in that year by 50%, wow. Right? And people they had never seen an ad like this in the automobile sector. Everybody wanted to understand what is so special about being inside a Rolls-Royce. And the reason it worked is because they did a lot of research. So this is not just creativity. David Ogilvy did a lot of research, and he sat inside the car and he tried to find out what are the things that are different. What are the visual, tactile, textural things that are different? How does it feel? And he managed to bring those details to life in a creative way. So there's a good combination of research and creativity. And even if you disagree with this headline, you can't disagree with the fact that it's a lot better than the headline that came before this. And that was the best car in the world. Okay, if you say so. So that's one example. I want to show you a couple of other examples of how we can show consumers snapshots through good writing. These are some ads for Amanvana, which I am guilty as charged. These are ads that we've done, and these are the only two ads I will show you from our portfolio. Again, you see, so tranquil, you can hear a leaf fall. The idea is to telescope deep into the resort and show them a magical moment. There's nothing exclusive about a leaf in a pond, but it's what you do with it with words that sort of makes it atmospheric. Or during the monsoon season, the ad on the right is typically a time when resorts don't do too well, but you still have to be interesting. So you say, my favorite song is Pitter Patter. And well, even if you don't like rain, this is a line that, you start convincing yourself that, yeah, this is something that I want, and this is something I want to experience. So these are again examples of how to transport your reader with snapshots, interesting details. Now, there are other ways of doing it, which is how do you make a marathon interesting? See what they do here, right? There's one way of doing this marathon is just to say, okay, there's this marathon with all these people who have been through surgery, and let's cheer for them, right? Yay. Okay, that's one way of doing it. And you have my heart, but you don't have my soul. You have my soul when you tell me this, right? You say, if you really want to see what a repaired heart valve looks like, be at the finish line at the year's New York City Marathon. So you are literally transporting the viewer, the reader, into the mind and the challenge and the spirit of this person who's running the marathon with such a nuanced detail, right? Now that is a marathon that even if I didn't attend it, I would never forget it because it's human. It's got a story. And I know it's Friday evening and we're all dying for a drink, so the picture on the right is not helping. But let's take a look at it because it's quite interesting. Talk about old bourbon in a new bottle. How do you make it interesting, right? This is awesome. If you spent years trapped inside the wall of a barrel, you'd be a little intense too. I think this is great because again, what is beautiful about these two ads is they transport you to a place. They give you snapshots. They visually take you somewhere. They make you imagine a repaired heart valve, and so much so that you are rooting for the repaired heart valve of a stranger. And you can feel the inside, the tempestuous inside of that barrel. And you want to meet this devil's cut variant of Jim Beam. So it's all about the power of details. Now, the thing is, you may not always have such interesting products to talk about. You may not always have great bourbon and a fantastic resort, and you may not get to work on the Rolls Royce account. I hope you do. I'm just saying it's a slim possibility, but you still have to make stuff interesting, right? So that's the challenge. And I want to make it as simple as possible. This is also interesting. This is a brand called Neptune. It's just a blue sofa. It's really just a blue sofa, but look what they've done with it. They take the sofa, they place it in a beautiful wintry color palette with gray, white, and blue, and they have this kid sitting in it, and they have this hint of an open window. The minute I saw this email, I was like, I want to be there. I just want to I want to sit there and I want to read my book. That's what the picture does. Sometimes you can create snapshots and you can tell a story, not just with words, but with a combination of words and pictures. You can create a world that a consumer wants to enter. But that's really the power of details. Okay, so that's the first value or technique. That's snapshots. I hope it gave you a sense of the first value. We're going to look at the second one, which is conflicts.
Philip, Sneha says she would like to see more lines that you worked on. Just a great comment.
Well, um, yeah, those are the only two ones that I have. I deliberately left out my work because there was too much competition in this presentation with Rolls-Royce and Jim Beam. There is just no point fighting with the greats. You should do it while you're ahead. But anyway, we can take a look at some of that stuff later. Thanks, Neha. That's very sweet of you. We're looking at the second storytelling value, which is conflicts, right? And if you see in art, okay, basically what we're saying, the formula is, I hate the word formula, but it works in this case. Introduce them to a nice person, then make that person's life a little hard. Okay, so this is what happens in art, is that it's conflict that makes life hard. But conflict in art is very interesting, you know. When your boss is screaming at you, it's hell for you. But when the boss is screaming at the protagonist in the movie show, you're going like this. It's very exciting because you want to see what's going to happen next. And it's the same with branding. So the trick is to figure out how to do it. So let's see. Let's take a look at art. What I have is I have a couple of videos for us to see how this functions in art, because cinema does this really, really well. The first clip is a film that most of you would have seen, which is it's Captain Marvel. We have the very nice Brie Larson, who is put in a bit of a spot. She has to face up with the super intelligence who tells her that, look, you're great, you're intelligent, and you're fantastic, but you're nothing without us. So, you know, that's her conflict. And the very nice Scarlett Johansson's character in Marriage Story wants to get out of her marriage and craft her own career and wants to find herself. But her divorce lawyer tells her that because you're a woman, you're going to be held to a higher standard. And it sucks, but this is something you're going to have to deal with. That's from Marriage Story. If it's a pretty good film to watch, particularly if some of you out there are considering marriage. This is a good film to watch. It'll give you some food for thought. Just putting that out there. Okay, so what's interesting about both these clips is conflict. We love it when movies do this to us. You could even see Scarlett Johansson's face when Laura Dern was telling her the reality. Even though the reality was so harsh and so ugly, Scarlett Johansson was getting inspired. Her character was getting inspired, but she was nodding and saying, yeah, you're right. This is what I have to do. It sucks, but this is what I have to do. So we like putting our characters in art through these kind of conflicts. Now, we cannot replicate this sort of art in brands, obviously, for many reasons. First of them being that you might lose the account. But you can't get to this level of complexity in brand communication. But you can absorb from this. You can take the key lesson. The key lesson is that you take someone nice and you have something a little uncomfortable or a little difficult happen to them so that the viewer is rooting for them. Let's see how the latest WhatsApp series, the WhatsApp film series does this. It's quite interesting. That is what you do in quarantine. That's how you get a haircut. So what we like here is a very simple conflict. We take a nice, likable woman and we put her through a conflict. And you can see the tension, the anxiety on her face is palpable, but that works. As readers, we're on the edge of our seat a little bit and we're wondering, oh my God, what is she going to do? Like, is she going to do it? Is she actually going to do it on her own? And she does it. And the filmmaker leads us to her victory and we feel good about it. And that conflict is great. And I know that's one way of doing it. There are lots of other ways of doing it. Here is, let's look at how people do it in print. Now, this is a very interesting ad that came about recently. It basically introduces the tortoise as the dumbest creature on the planet. And here is an excerpt from the ad. It says, such is its lack of intelligence that the sea turtle cannot differentiate between a plastic bag and jellyfish, its favorite food. And so the shelled idiot gobbles the bags and dies. Then there's humans, the most intelligent species. We created art, fought disease, harnessed the wind, and put a vehicle on Mars. And that plastic bag in the ocean. Same one that killed the dumb turtle. Now, this is another way of taking a nice protagonist, in this case, the sea turtle, and amplifying its tragedy, its conflict. And there's a nice twist because you think the joke's on the turtle, but of course, by the end, you realize the joke is on the human race. Here's another example. This ad is a bit of a Rubik's Cube of an ad, so I'm going to decode it for you. What's basically happening here is you can see a whole lot of ceramic mugs, but they're all placed in very close proximity to the power socket for some strange reason. And Bosch says, isn't it time you got a cordless drill? So what's happened is the user, the consumer, there's a whole story behind the ad here. There's a very simple conflict again, but it's a fun conflict. You know, someone loves traveling all over the world and collecting these plates, and he or she has a cord-based drill. So they can't go outside the radius of that cord. So Bosch says, hey man, you know, just get a cordless drill and put those plates up wherever you want. Again, it's a fun way of looking at a conflict, and it's more of an everyday thing. Okay, that was the second value, which is conflict. So we looked at snapshots. How do you transport your viewer through interesting, nuanced details? And then we looked at conflict, which is something that art does very well. And how can you borrow some of those values from art in brand communication? Now we're going to look at the third one, which is very critical because it's something that ensures the longevity of your communication. And it's something that we frequently forget to do. It's called narratives. The idea is not just to type words, but to create a narrative, have a structure. You know, you have a lot of dots, and don't just feed the consumer dots, connect the dots for the consumer. Structure their time into interesting chunks with ups and downs. Consumers, readers, humans like that. They like to be guided through twists and turns. Now, I want to take a segue and look at art for a second. What can we learn from a Dutch 17th century painter in this regard? Indulge me while I make the connection between art and painting and storytelling and all of that. Okay, so the picture on the left and there's a picture on the right. Obviously, if you were at an auction and you had to buy a painting or a photograph, if you have some sense, you will pick up the painting on the right. Why? Because the painting on the left is flat. And by that, I mean, technically the light is flat, so it's uninteresting. You can't make out the details, but the painting on the right is contrasted. It has a little more contrast, and hence it's interesting. Now, what is happening here is the eye likes contrast. The eye likes moving between light and shadow. The eye feels entertained. Just like how the eye feels entertained by contrast, the mind also feels entertained by contrast. The mind also feels entertained by highlights and shadows in the storytelling, ups and downs, right? So that's how it works. Now, if you look at, let's look at a music video, which is an art form that has perfected storytelling in so many ways. We won't play the whole video, but we'll just look at the video in a snapshot to see how they do it. There's a very famous video called Take Me to Church by a band called Hozier. It's a controversial video, and but it's interesting. And I'll give you if you've seen the video, bear with me. But if you haven't seen it, I'm going to break down the story very quickly. So it shows a romantic relationship between two men. And the box that you see represents their secret, which they keep hidden under the ground. And then one of the friends leaves to another town. And then extremists in the second row identify that these two are having a relationship. And it's obvious that this is a culture where this is a serious taboo, and maybe you're empowered to take the law in your hands when you spot a gay couple. So they go to the house. Meanwhile, to the house of the man who has stayed behind in order to attack him or destroy his property. Meanwhile, the lover who left hears about the conflicts happening in the city, and he comes back. Bottom row, he sees that the box is out, the secret is out. That's the metaphor. And by the time he gets to his lover's house, he sees his lover being hauled away by these extremists, and they're starting a fire, and they throw the box. They can't open the box, and they're very, very curious and irritated about what's in the box. And since they can't open it, they throw it into the fire, but the box doesn't burn because it's made of steel. So there's a metaphor going throughout the video, which is that it's a secret. It might appear like a shameful secret, but it's their love. It's indestructible. It keeps them strong. Now, what is interesting about this is the reason I have placed this very turbulent video in front of you, and excuse me for that, is the structure. What you have is at first something happens, all the good stuff happens. Then you have the conflict starting, or the hard times beginning, and then there's a now. Now what has happened, right? So this is your typical 3-part way of telling a story: first act, second act, third act, and it's usually very effective to look at structure, right? Let's see how. Now this is a technique in art, and let's see how this technique has been adapted in brand communication. And I'm going to turn to a different kind of medium. I'm going to look at a magazine. This is Time magazine, a magazine that uses great examples of how to structure communication in a storytelling format. So here we have an article about the pandemic and its effect on children's psychological health, right? I'm going to quickly read that. It says, pandemics can make no distinctions between the victims that they attack and those they spare. COVID-19 has been different, particularly when it comes to age. The disease has shown a special animus for older people, and it has spared kids. So we read this paragraph and we think, okay, fine, but then they up the ante. But if COVID-19 is sparing most kids' bodies, it's not being so kind to their minds. The pandemic stress causes children to get especially shaken when the certainties of their world collapse. So what they're implying is the same certainty which can be absorbed by an adult cannot be so easily absorbed by a child. So finally, what? I worry that kids will get a double wallop, says Ezra Goldstein, a health policy researcher at the University of Minnesota. They have the disease itself, plus the fear, the added fear of the disease, which is like a double stress creator for children. So you see how they have done very smartly the at first sort of message, where they lay the ground and they put you at ease and they say, this is the problem and maybe it's not so bad, it's okay. But then this happens. But even though it's sparing kids' bodies, it's being unkind to their minds. Now, what does that mean? What's the implication of all this? It's the 3-part structure. It means that in the long term, kids may be more at risk because there's the disease and the fear of the disease. So that's an interesting, very subtle way of how you can integrate structure from art and structure from storytelling into your writing to keep the reader's attention. Words like at first, then, however, but now, they're emotional signals to the reader to, okay, something else is happening now. Oh, okay, something else is happening now. It sort of keeps the reader on their toes. And it's a very subtle way of doing that. I want to show you another quick example of an email. This is, emails can be notoriously spammy and boring. But again, if you structure your emails using the concept of this 3-part structure, or if you create breaks, you could hold your reader's attention. This is actually from a charity. It's called Charity Water. They take your money and they put it in places that have water shortages. So it's a progress update. But what they do is they say, okay, here is the project timeline and here is where you are. See, you are here. Your money is right now going into this stage of the project where our partners have finished the basic work and we're training the communities to manage their water point. It's interesting, you know where you are in the story, right? And then they say, wait a second, we know you're very busy. So let's remind you, where is this project happening? This project is happening in the Rulindo district, which is in Rwanda. So a quick recap of where it's happening. And then they remind you that this is a land of 1,000 hills. It's a difficult place to construct anything, but we're doing it. Your money has gone a long way. We want to hear from you. Now, this is so much more effective than just telling me that here is where your project is gone, your money's gone to this project. When I get an email like this, I'm so much more confident about where my money has gone, because I know these guys are sincere and they're telling me a story about where my money has gone. So I'm a lot more interested. Before and after is always interesting in structure. So with no offense, this is Weight Watchers. The entrance door is a lot bigger than the exit door. It's a cheap shot, I know, but it's again a way of using structure in a funny way, before, after, steps like that, to try and keep your audience sort of hooked. That's the third value and technique, which brings us to the last one, which is the conversation. That woman seems to be in a relationship with poetry, and all the best to the guy who tries to get her attention. Anyway, so the conversation, yes. So we've looked at details, we looked at conflict, we looked at structure, and the last thing is really the most tangible and perhaps the only tool that we have, ultimately the only weapon we have, which is language. As writers, I mean, copy is for consumers. Humans respond to language because language is alive. It can be warm, it can be curious, it can be vigorous, it can be inspiring, it can be funny, it can be unexpected. You can do whatever you want with language. So that's the beauty of the medium. Let's look at a couple of ads. These are some ads which I would say are interesting. They do the job, they're perfectly serviceable, but they're maybe not so memorable, right? Cheers to the year, lead the pack, dive into summer. Now, they work. There's nothing wrong with them, but they follow a pattern. They follow a sort of formula. You probably won't remember them. So who can we look at to get inspired about how to use language? Well, the people who use language in the most interesting ways, the most elemental of ways, are the poets. So let's take a look at some poets in art on how they've used language. This is a line by the beloved Mary Oliver. She says, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Tell me." So I look at the tone, right? It's conversational, it's intimate. You can't not read that sentence and smile, because it's like somebody has sort of thrown a paper plane into your soul straight away. Or look at Charles Bukowski, who's a little more loose. Sometimes you climb out of bed in the morning and you think, I'm not going to make it. But you laugh inside, remembering all the times you've felt that way. Now, we've all been in this situation. If you just wipe off Charles Bukowski from there, I can imagine this as a headline for a lot of brands. I don't know. It could be, your guess is as good as mine. But the point is, it can work. There is a sweet spot. There is a magical place between poetry and copywriting where you can form a sort of a midpoint, where you can have a portal where things go back and forth between each other. But why are these poems working, right? Why are they working? Because there's warmth, right? Mary Oliver is being warm. She's being inspiring. Warm and inspiring is an unusual combination, but she does it. Charles Bukowski is being witty and real. There's a bit of jarring texture in these lines. Everything is not smooth, right? They allow you to feel some texture. They allow you, they give you little disruptions. They give you a little slap in the face. Like he says, sometimes you climb out of bed in the morning and you think, I'm not going to make it. See, that's a very unusual line to read, because normally when you read, you want something inspiring. You want someone to say, I'm going to get out of bed and I feel like $1 million and I'm going to do all the things that I plan to do and I feel abundance and all of that. Charles, because he's not saying that. He's saying you're going to sometimes get up in the morning and you're going to think that you're not going to make it. This is not good news. But guess what? It's fun. As a reader, it's okay. You're okay to get that slightly jarring message once in a while, because he makes you laugh in the end, right? So we don't always have to be smooth. And then there's the casual passion of both these writers. Okay, so that's enough of Poetry 101. So how can we adapt this sort of thinking in brand communication? That's really the point. And that's, obviously we can't write like this for various reasons, but we can borrow some values. And even if it's 5%, even if it's 10%, let's look at a couple of ads that have, obviously several notches down, but they've at least made an attempt. So rise and really shine. I kind of like that. It's very simple. It's very simple, but it makes me smile for a second. You know, it's not just rise and shine. We take the cliche and we go one step forward. I like to believe if Mary Oliver was a copywriter, and if someone was holding a gun to her head, this is what she might have written, and she's probably turning in her grave right now. But anyway, so, and then if you want to make it witty and real, I love this. Look at this. Yep, you still have to do your taxes. See, an ad like this takes the sting out of doing your taxes at least by 5%, right? And again, if Bukowski was a copywriter, he might have gotten away with something like this. Though there would be a few beer stains on the ad. Well, look at jarring texture. I really like this ad. You know what they say? They say formulated by skeptics. So the minute you hear that, you're thinking, what? I mean, I'm not going to buy something that's formulated by skeptics. But then they say backed by science. Relax, don't worry, cool your tits. So formulated by skeptics is again a jarring sentence. It's a sentence that you don't normally see in an ad because marketers tend to create communication that is positive, reassuring, never surprising, politically correct. But it's nice to see stuff like this, you know, stuff that jars you, wakes you up, yeah, and you remember it. It shows that the brand is not worried about being vulnerable, and that's a good sign. Or this guy here who says, I never want to take them off ever. Very simple, right? It's just a line of dialogue, but it has so much more conversational sort of intimacy than a line that would have said, you'll never feel like taking them off. So simple little things that you can do to make your writing a little more conversational. And I think we shouldn't overcomplicate our lives. We should also not be afraid of being simple. So Starbucks has this way of just saying Merry Mondays, you know, during Christmas, which is unusual. It's unexpected. Merry Mondays. But then you get it. Oh, okay, you're excited about Christmas. Yeah, so am I. Yeah, of course, bring it on. So it's very simple, but it works. And really, let's not shy away from sometimes just being warm and simple. Hello there. There's nothing wrong with saying that. How many brands actually do this? We just jump into the message, into what we want the reader to process. But sometimes you have to remember, we all have to remember, I myself have a hard time remembering it, that consumers are human beings and they need simple salutations and messages just like anyone else, right? Now that's the first part of language. At the risk of complicating your life, I'm going to show you one more element because I like complicating lives. So what we discussed so far is how to use language in a conversational way. But I want to take you one step further and say that there's another function of language, which is social, which is civilizational, which is to reveal the truth. Iris Murdoch had this beautiful quote that said, the quality of a civilization depends upon its ability to reveal truth. And this in turn depends upon the scope and purity of its language. I love that. It's basically, it's making a connection between truthfulness and language. How deep you can go into the truth depends on the tool that you have, how sophisticated your tool is. And your tool is language. So the sophistication of your language and the risks you take with language will get you closer to the truth. Now you must be wondering, what the dash does Iris Murdoch have to do with me? I am just a struggling digital marketing guy in a little ad agency and I'm trying to figure out my life. Okay, I'll tell you. Stick with me, I'll tell you. The thing is, what brands do well or what art does well is take complexity and break it down. Art doesn't simplify. Art looks complexity in the face and it breaks it down. So it gives us the right language to embrace complexity instead of running away from it. I'll give you an example in art and in business. One of my favorite brands is the School of Life. They write all these interesting articles about psychology and people. So look at this article where they've written, they're trying to make a differentiation between straightforward people and complicated people. And they say, straightforward people, if they're unhappy with your behavior, they won't smile sweetly while developing noxious stores of envy or hatred in their minds. They're not going to do that. They're just going to immediately tell you gently but accurately how you have frustrated them. That's interesting. They've gone one step into complexity. They've given me an insight. On the other hand, complicated people, the problem with them is it's not just that they're complicated. They've gone one step deeper. They are painfully unsure about the legitimacy of their own desires, right? And how many of us read that sentence and think, oh my God, that's me. Okay, fine. So the beauty of this is you don't just give people a simple binary. You don't just say that so and so is complicated or so and so is simple. You go one step in and you reveal the nuance to the reader and you say, this is why people are complicated, or this is why people are simple. The fact is that you have acknowledged, you've gone deeper than the superficial. How do brands do this? Again, brands can't do this at this level of complexity because they lose their readers, but they can do it in small ways. And here are some inspiring examples. Take Apple, right? This is a manifesto by Apple that refuses to simplify life, but goes head on into complications. So what does he say? He says there's work and there's your life's work. So he's making a pitch between, productive work and passionate work. And your life's work is a kind of work that has your fingerprints all over it. It's the kind of work that you'll never compromise on and you won't mind missing a weekend for. That is the kind of work you can do at Apple. People don't come here to play it safe. They come here to swim in the deep end. See, look at the subtle embracing of complexity. He has gone one step further and the brand is telling you, there are two kinds of work. Yeah, don't just believe this monolith called work. Like how, don't just believe this monolith called complicated. It means something. So don't just believe this monolith called work. There's more to it. There's work that pays the bills, but there's your life's work. Your life's work is like this, like this, like this. Are you in or are you out? So it embraces complexity. Or look at how Nike does it. Again, very interesting, very succinct, very precise, but they raise the question that greatness is not only for a chosen few. The truth is greatness is for all of us, because this is not about lowering expectations. It's about raising them for every last one of us. So Nike is going one step further into greatness. It's taking that monolith called greatness and it's breaking it down and saying, you don't have to be great just because you have tackled the mile in 5 seconds. You can be great if you can be better than what you were yesterday. If you can stop lowering your expectations, you're already on the path to greatness. See, this is the kind of writing that makes you think. It goes one step deeper into the problem. It embraces the complexity. When readers listen to stuff like this, whether it's in art or whether it's in branding, what happens is they think, yeah, they're right. This gives me hope. I think, yeah, they're addressing something which is important. Maybe this is something I can pay attention to. That's the beauty of embracing complexity. Okay. We are done with the 4 values. We saw all 4 of them, and I hope that was interesting. But I want to leave you with one thought, which is some of you are probably thinking, when do I do this? Right? Because it can get a little burdensome. Our lives are not very, we don't exactly always have the time to sit down and write stories. If you have an ad, which is, if you have a deadline going for tomorrow at 9 p.m. or at 3 p.m. and if you sit back and you say, I'm going to think about what Mary Oliver might have done in this situation, your client will probably wallop you. So there is a time to do this and there's a time to step back, right? And this is just a model for your reference, because I like to leave something tangible when it comes to things like this so that you can actually think about when you use it. What's on the x-axis is your priority of work. Is it important or is it urgent? Some of you are thinking it's all urgent. I know. Yeah. And there's the function, which is either strategic or tactical. For starters, maybe you can start thinking about stories, for all strategic work or for any work that is important. Which if it's important and if it's not urgent, it means you have some time. And remember, we said this whole process of adapting storytelling from art into branding takes time. You need time. So maybe you can earmark which jobs in your job list require some investment in storytelling and which ones are just BAU, which is, sorry for the acronym, it's business as usual. So it's a model. I'll leave it to you to decide how you want to take it forward. Maybe if you just did it once a week, you could start exercising your storytelling genes and borrow something from your heritage, from Scheherazade and Marco Polo, so that those genes don't go to sleep, so that they don't hibernate. How? Okay, you must be thinking, how do I keep doing this? It's very simple. There is no magic wand. Remember, I told you, somewhere along the lines, you squashed, you smothered your inner child. We've all done it. The inner child takes to stories like sharks take to blood. Oof, bad metaphor. But the inner child has a penchant for stories. I mean, they understand it instantly. And the reason is because they're open and they're curious. So I would say, be curious about your users. Who are these people? What do they do? What are their passions? Where do they hang out? Speak to 4 5 of them and understand what's the story of their life. Take the WhatsApp commercial. I'm quite sure that commercial came out of somebody going and meeting someone and just hearing the story and thinking, yeah, that's a great idea for a story. Understand who these people are, spend time with them, get details from their life, broaden your perception, um, take nothing for granted. The smallest, simplest, nuanced detail that seems boring to you might be very, very refreshing for a consumer or for a user. So it's really about being more curious about your users, and that's the snapshot of all four of your values: snapshots, conflicts, narratives, language. Um, that's the framework, that's the values. I hope you were able to see some connections between art and branding. I hope it wasn't too far-fetched. And yeah, they lived happily ever after. Hopefully, unless we are talking about the cast of Marriage Story. Thank you so much for listening. And yeah, on to you, Sharan and Preeti. Discussions, questions.
I'll just open up the chat to everybody to ask their questions, but I got a couple of my own. You
Yeah,
just
sure.
started in the beginning by talking about how we're normally in problem solving mode, and we stop doing storytelling. But isn't storytelling also a tool to solve problems?
Yes, definitely. When you put it that way, definitely. Are you speaking in the context of a brand or in general?
It could be, but purely out of communication. If
Yeah.
you want to succinctly and effectively get your message across, isn't
Yeah.
storytelling a very good tool for that?
I think, yes, I would agree with you. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think there have been a lot of brands that have maybe addressed problem areas through stories. That's what you mean? That
Yeah,
as well. Yeah, yeah, of course. And we've also seen um, a lot of politicians and celebrities address problems through stories, through narratives. So I think, yes, storytelling is a great tool to diffuse a problem or to explain a problem. Definitely, yeah.
okay. Is there one type of story more effective than others? I mean, normally you got your heartstrings or your comedy, which stands out, right? Uh,
Yeah.
is there is really one type of story better than the other?
Again, I assume you're asking in the context of brands, right? Like
Sure,
in terms of brand communication.
sure.
Yeah. So what is normally the case, and I guess you guys would also be aware of this, is that there are all kinds of stories, but two or three kinds of stories that work very, very well are emotional or heart stories that involve family or relationships. And the second kind that works really well is comedy, especially in brands. These two stories are kind of like, even when they're bad, they're good sort of thing. So that's what usually tends to work. Yeah, I think so. But otherwise, it's very difficult to say if there's one kind of story that works. But I would say there is one kind of structure that works, if I may say so. There is usually one kind of structure that always works, which is what one of the things that I mentioned in the presentation today.
Okay. I've got one question straight from my field, which is what do you think is the role of storytelling within UX?
Within UX?
Yeah,
Oh,
is
yeah.
it possible to structure it the same way?
I think it can be possible. I can't say I'm a UX expert. At least I'm obviously not on the level that you guys are, because you guys are the big daddies of UX. But I definitely think UX that tells a story is going to be far more interesting than step by step UX. But the thing is, it all depends on how we sort of break down that whole experience for the user, right? I mean, I think it'll take a lot of understanding of a user persona to understand who they are and what are their pain points, what is it that they want, and what are their needs, and then to sort of translate all of that into a story. I think it's a great idea, and I think some people are already doing it. So I definitely think UX is ripe for storytelling, because in the word UX itself is, the second word is experience. So I think, yeah, definitely. But I think it's going to be more challenging than mainstream communication, and that's what's interesting. In mainstream communication, it's easier to tell a story because you have fewer variables.
Yeah.
Whereas in UX, you have more variables.
Yeah.
And
disconnected timelines going
disconnected timelines, exactly. And I think you have to work much harder at holding someone's attention in the online platform than in an offline platform, because there's so much distraction. There's
right.
so much sensory stimulation.
Yeah.
Colors, boxes. So I think you have to work much harder. So it's interesting though how it'll be a challenge, but it'll be interesting. Yeah.
Cool. I look forward to working with you on that. So,
Oh yeah, sure, anytime.
we've got some questions here. Somebody called M says, I'm curious, in your stories in Labyrinths, you seem to be able to build stories, poetry into what otherwise might seem mundane to the non-Philip eye. How did you train yourself on this? Over time, could you practice on the most unobvious? How did you go about refining your art?
Oh well, I think it's there's nothing conscious or deliberate about it. Thanks so much for the question. It's really just a way of seeing. I think I am well. It helps to be a little introverted and to have a narrow field of interest. So you just have no choice but to go deeper and deeper into what you're seeing. So I think that definitely helps. Um, I think if I find something interesting, no matter how small, insignificant it is, I tend to just go ahead and write about it without wondering whether anyone's going to understand it or appreciate it. So I think I just follow my intuition and write about something, no matter how simple it is. And I just do that every day as a matter of discipline. And then over time, I think it deepens your perception. I don't know if that answers the question, but
I think that's very insightful, Philip. Uh, we got another comment which says, "Great webinar. Thanks, Philip, for your wonderful insights." M goes on to say, "Love the point on getting into the world of the consumer as we build the story, pitch, and narrative." It's design thinking as comment.
yeah, absolutely.
But I think this term of design thinking is kind of like being attributed to the user experience world, but I think it's just art, right? It's all fields of design really that so seem to take from the same place or borrow from the same place. What are your thoughts?
And by that, you mean art itself?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I guess there's no, it's an opinion. Yeah, it's highly possible, because I think we can, I don't know what came first, art or commerce. It's a little difficult. I don't know, ancient man, was he worrying about how to make money, or was he drawing the sunset on his rock? So it's difficult to, I know when you get philosophical about it, it's difficult to trace roots. But I'd like to believe that somewhere along the line, business communication or brand communication is a sort of poor cousin of art. I just like to believe that this is the case. Somewhere there is an offshoot where you will find how it came out of maybe essay writing or poetry or whatever it is. Yeah, but this poorer cousin has become very different in terms of how he or she sounds and the kind of language that they use. But I think, yeah, on some level, yeah, I'd like to believe that all brand communication comes out of the mother lode of art, if you like. But it's funny that the funny thing is they are so different, and at the same time they're also so similar. The similarities are very subtle. So that's what I find interesting.
I've got a question here from Purva. Firstly, she says, "Thanks for the great session."
Thank you.
You wanted to understand if there are any tips when you are trying to get people to action on something. Does the communications have to be structured in a specific way? What works, what doesn't work?
Give them a discount.
Sure.
Yeah. So thanks for the question, Purva. I don't have an immediate shotgun answer to your question because I'll have to, I think it requires a little more thinking, a little more structuring. But I think if you want people to take action, it's a good idea to start from a pain point. I think it's a good idea to remind them about a pain point that has been a huge bugbear for them. And language like, aren't you fed up of how this is, this feels in your life? Don't you want this to change? Like, and then I think that's a good way to get someone's attention. But that's just, and to make them take action, but that's really just one way of doing it. There could be several other ways, but that's one way of doing it. You start with a pain point. So instead of talking about your product and how beautiful it is, you try and talk from the point of view of the consumer's pain point instead. That could be a way of inspiring someone to take action. That's a very, very broad response. There's a lot more thinking that has to go into it, but that's for starters.
Philip, I've got one last question. So we've got in branding, repetition is kind of key. It builds recall. That's the theory, at least. So what role does storytelling have to play here? Because if you hear the same story 10 times, it's not interesting anymore. So how do you weigh one against the other?
There you have me, Sharon.
Sorry?
I said you have me there. I don't have an answer. It's a great question. In fact, it is something I thought about even before this this webinar, which is that in branding, just like you said, you have to build more recall, and you build recall through consistency. And storytelling is all about breaking the pattern. So this is I think it's a great question. I don't know if there's an answer, but I think we can take a small bit of inspiration from Marco Polo, the story at the beginning. Marco Polo described 40 or 50 different cities to Kublai Khan. And for a long time, he made them think that they were all different cities. But secretly, he was just describing one city in different ways. I know it's a very, very smart answer to your question. But,
no, that's fantastic.
But I think it's a question of being so passionate about the product or the brand, being so passionate about it that you start discovering new facets to it. And you start tying up those facets under one theme. I think it would require that level of involvement in your job, which could alienate your spouse.
Okay. That's a beautiful answer, says Anne, by the way. So, anyway, thank you so much, Philip. Thank you. This was a wonderful talk.
Yeah,
it was funny, lovely, full of insights. I really loved it.
We'd love to have your presentation to upload to our website if you give us your permission to.
Absolutely, absolutely. All yours.
All right.
That'd be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining and staying back on Friday. Have a good weekend.
No, the pleasure was all mine. Thanks again for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Have a good one.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you everyone for joining us.
Bye. Thanks for having me.